Welcome back to the third option. We're
all in white.
if you're just listening, just imagine Rick in white and Judy in white.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
pure.
Very pure. Hey, that's appropriate.
Because today,
We're in Romans chapter 5 is what we're going to talk about today. And we've been talking about the book of, we started last episode talking about the book of Romans, Paul's teachings, Paul's writings, and we covered chapters 1 and 2. And so we're going to move. We're not doing a comprehensive verse by verse and book by book or chapter by chapter study of Romans, but we're highlighting this book. And so we want to take time to look at Romans chapter 5 because that is an important one that gets into some really good things that should be understood. In fact, they should be easily understood as you read along. But I don't think, it seems that maybe the majority or a lot of people anyway don't realize the impact of what Paul's trying to say. And some of these things he just repeats again and again. He's trying to drive certain points home. And so we shouldn't miss them.
so just as a brief overview, we covered this last week when we did Romans 1 and 2, but this book is considered Paul's most thorough theological presentation. It's like his thesis on grace and his theology. And it is what the early church bonded over. Like it's what brought the early church together. And it's one of the most important messages of the early Christian church.
You understand that, the early church did not have a New Testament. They had an old, but the writings that they had of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John hadn't been written.
Right.
Sometimes people think they were because they're the first ones in the New Testament. The New Testament's not laid out in chronological order as far as how they were written.
And neither are the letters of Paul.
Neither are the letters of Paul, but the first writings that people did have to look at and to read concerning theology and the things of God in the light of Christ were Paul's letters. And like you said, Romans is one of them. In fact, I think Galatians was probably the first scriptures of the New Testament that were ever written before the Gospels.
And those letters were shared among the churches.
Yeah.
But even though Paul is writing to the church in Rome, and that is who the letter initially goes to, that letter is then passed around because it's such an encouragement to all believers,
right?
The Jewish believers, the non-Jewish believers.
And that's why we find a number of ancient manuscripts with some of these letters too, because they would be copied and sent on. Yeah. So Romans chapter 5, we get into, and when you look at, if you wanted to break it down into, I guess maybe 3 sections, he uses beautiful language all the time in his writings. And he uses it so much that, and it's very poetic. And I wonder if sometimes we miss the impact, the spiritual impact of it because of the beauty of the language, especially if it's in either King James or something similar to that. But right at the top of chapter 5, he talks about that we're justified by faith. And because of that, or by trusting in him, and because of that, we have peace with God. And then he says, and also we have access because we trust in him. And so with this kind of grace, we have access to him, and it causes us to rejoice. And so here's this language. You cannot miss this in all of his writings. He's so crazy about the grace of God for all men. He has just been turned on to it. When we were earlier episodes, we were talking about his life and the dramatic change that was made. He went from extreme legalism to extreme grace.
I mean, he was an expert. He calls himself a Pharisee among Pharisees. Like he's an expert at justification by works, by law. And now it's like a completely different message where he's, like you say, turned on to this. No, it's by grace. It's by trusting. And that's a big step. And I think the Gentiles didn't have to unlearn the legalism as much as the Jewish believers did.
Right, because they trusted in the religion that they had been taught. And now they're having to look at things in the lens of Christ.
Different light.
Yeah. It's kind of like, a lot of times, even just talking about the grace and the love of God, it's often harder for certain Christians to truly embrace that. Could God be that gracious to everyone like that? But then you can talk to someone that's like doesn't go to church at all, and they're like, "Yeah, I believe God's that good."
I think also too how you're raised too.
Yeah.
There's sort of a retributive idea to raising children that you know, punish when they do wrong and you reward them when they do right. And that can lead to that it just makes sense that God is retributive because that's
Right.
how I was raised.
That's how
And
this world is.
this how the world
That's
works.
why Jesus would when he'd do his teachings and his parables, he would say, "Now the kingdom of heaven is like this." That means, I know you do it one way in the world. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about another way,
Yes.
God's way.
And the kingdom of heaven is within you. So it's not a matter of trying to make the physical country that you live in be religious or right.
Yeah.
It's how we live
The
inside.
kingdom is within us and it's growing, and of its increase there will be no end. And we don't have to come up with the ideas of how to do this. It will produce the fruit of love, joy, peace, gentleness, and it will spread that way. And it does. Now, I want to say something else that just came to my mind too, as we look at this at Romans 5, is that in the writings of Paul, I've noticed, because as we were talking about his conversion and how he went from extreme that to extreme this, he was crazy about grace, crazy. And I realized that we often as Christians, we subconsciously want to water down some of his language, because if you take it at face value, which I think we can do in this case, is it's very extreme in a lot of cases, and so a lot of times we sort of apologize for Paul. Like someone say, "Well, Paul said, you know, this, grace was this big," and we're like, "Yeah, but he didn't really mean it was
I don't
like
want to
that."
scare everybody,
Yeah,
so I'll just water it
yeah.
down a little bit.
And there again, it's just because we're still learning how big God's grace and love is. And so sometimes it kind of scares us because it seems like no, that's getting out of control there. That's too much grace. People call it hyper grace. Well, Paul did use the
The
language.
word.
He used the word,
Hyper.
right?
That means
Hyper.
hyper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a hyper grace that abounds, that you cannot quantify it.
And that if you are preaching true grace, you will be misunderstood as a promoter of sin.
Like he was. Yeah. He said, "Well, why do they accuse us of licentiousness?"
Yeah.
And he was like, so anyway, after the initial verses that we mentioned, where he talks about the peace and the grace in that beautiful language, he goes on and he talks about how Christ died for the ungodly. And he uses, I think, three different ways of saying that. He says, first of all, he says, when we were still without strength, Christ died for the ungodly. And then there in verse 8, he says, and while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And then he says, and when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through his Son. And much more, having been reconciled, we're saved by his life. And so he gets into the not us doing the work, but Jesus doing the work. Without strength, we could not save ourselves. We could not justify ourselves. We couldn't live up to it. We couldn't be good enough. We couldn't climb high enough. What we couldn't do, God did, right? And so that leads us into that. So then he gets into what I believe is the meatiest part of this.
What verse are you in?
I'm beginning in verse 12, and he goes down for the next several verses, reiterating this contrast between Adam and Jesus, what Adam did and what Jesus did, and how they work. And if you pay attention to his language, you can hear his heart, that he's really doing his best to make this clear. And he's like, get this, people of Rome. Now, remember, as we said in the last episode, he wanted to unite the church that had been, having some headbutting going on.
Yeah.
He wanted to unite them around grace. Some were still trying to bring in legalism and thinking that needed to be a part of it and all that. And he shoots that down, and he does so in the first 4 chapters here of Romans, and he continues on in 5 And he can unite everybody in this if he puts it all about Jesus. Now, if you make it about us, then my works can be better than yours. Yours can be better than mine. God might condone what I do, but maybe not what you do. And there again, we have tension. But if we can make it all about Christ and not us, then that takes it off of all of us and puts it on him really where it should be. And that's what Paul's doing. So he says in verse 12, he says, okay, so just as through one man, sin entered the world and death spread to all men because all sinned. So he starts off talking about Adam. And then, and he continues talking about that, but I want to skip down. Then he says, verse 15, for if by one man's offense many died, much more the grace of God and the gift of grace by one man, Jesus, abounded to many. And that word it's not a word that is a limiting word. It's a word that is open-ended. It could mean everybody, all.
The word many?
The word many.
It's not a limited number.
Right.
It could mean just
right. Because it says, for if by one man's offense, many died. Well, it wasn't just like 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Or 3 out of 10.
Sure.
It was everybody,
Yeah.
right? That's what the many means. It means everybody. Yeah. So it says, and if the everybody or the many died by Adam, then the many received the gift of grace through one man, Jesus. Okay. Now, that's big language. And I tell people, do with that whatever you can do with that, whatever that means to you. That's how you and God have got to figure this out. But he keeps using this Adam and Jesus example, and he says, and the gift is not like that which came through the one that sinned, for the judgment came from one offense, resulted in condemnation. But the free gift, which came from many offenses, resulted in justification, condemnation, justification. Because if by one man's offense death reigned through that one, much more those who receive abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will reign in life through Christ Jesus. Or some translations say life will reign in them. Mm-hmm. Therefore, through one man's offense, judgment came to all men that resulted in condemnation. Even so, through one man's righteous act, the free gift came to all men, resulting in justification of life. Now, one thing that I think, if we want to be honest, we need to deal with this idea of Adam. It seems like people have no problem believing that one man could condemn us all. They have no problem in the power of Adam. What I'd like to see us is believing in the power of Jesus to bring life to us.
Yeah, as a greater power.
Yeah, and he goes to pains to say that. He says, and the free gift is not like that because it's greater than that, much more than. He says, if Adam could do that, then much more Jesus does this. And so what we should have a mindset that we are not a part of a continuing story of Adam.
Like a self-improvement program of the Adam.
And Jesus is just a footnote. And the story of Adam goes on, but Jesus came and he did a little thing here, but Adam is still ruling and reigning here. Mm-hmm. And so what Jesus did is he brought what the Bible calls a new man, a new creation, a new and living way, a new day, a resurrection, a life. Jesus brought, in fact, he's called the last Adam. You know why? Because he came as a son of man and died. And that's why Paul says the old man was crucified. Right. Who's the old man? Adam. And so the life giver came. And that's why now mankind has resurrection life. And so Jesus came and did this wonderful thing, and it all convenes in him, and all of our life is found in him, and our righteousness and justification. What are the 3 things we talked about that he said?
He said life
instead of death, because Adam brought death. Justification instead of condemnation, because he brought condemnation. Jesus brings justification. And the other one was righteousness instead of sinfulness, which goes along with that. But I love that he does it again and again. He just keeps repeating himself, changing a few words here to drive the point home. But he keeps saying, if Adam did this, but look what Jesus did.
Yeah, so I would say one of my questions early on, or maybe even now, is why when I first heard the gospel, I felt like if Jesus was that powerful and he did that and my old man is dead, why do I keep doing things that don't seem like Jesus had any effect for?
Right. Good question. And it's a question that probably everybody has asked. And I believe the answer is that he said, here's how it works. The kingdom of heaven is a seed. And like Isaiah 9 says, and the government will be on his shoulders, and of that government and of peace, there will be no, and the increase of that government and of peace, there will be no end. So the increase would go, Jesus said it would continue to increase. So it's been in the earth, and no matter what they've been able to do, it continues to increase. You can't stop the revelation. It just keeps happening. The life just keeps happening. In us individually, what happens in our life, he said, you still have tribulation, but in me, there's peace. So let's say the seed was planted in me. Well, I've been through some hellacious things since then. I've been through some tribulation. I've been through some times when I'm just like, God, is this even true? And in all of that, what's going on? The seed continues to increase. There were times early on when I would say, God, why do I still sin? Why don't you just take this from me? I don't want to be like this. Well, I'm begging you to change me. Why don't you? And he didn't. But the seed keeps growing.
Well, what he said was, I'm weaving my ways into you, which is a different thing than
an instant fix. Instant fixes do not usually last long term.
Because you have you and you have God in you together, working together. And if he just overrid you, you wouldn't be together.
Right. And so exactly. So the Bible says, so it's God in you causing you to will and to do his good pleasure. So he starts affecting our want tos. He starts affecting, and it does start to affect the behavior, the actions, what we think, what we feel, what we do. It does that, but it doesn't fix overnight because it's a relationship of God in us. So often we have the idea of a God outside of us. Here's us, here's God. You're the fixer. Fix me. Do stuff to me. Yeah. Do good stuff to me.
So I don't have to go through anything hard.
Right. And some people think that if something bad's happening, God's doing bad stuff to them. That's how they think how this relates. But in Christ, it's oneness. It's the mystery that Paul wrote about. He said that he said, it's Christ in you, and that Christ in you is that hope of glory. He is implanted within you, and he, like that seed, like his wisdom continues to grow in you, because like you said, it's woven into you. You've got your own mind, you've got your own will, but Christ in you also. And so we're being taught by him from the inside out. But it's a teaching, it's learning, and it's a lot of relationship. It is a walk with him.
Well, let me ask you this. If I say, no, that's not true, can God still be working? Or do
Yes.
What I say is like, no, I believe that this is true. And that sort of turns it on and allows it to work. Or can he work regardless?
A little bit of both of that. First of all, how many things have I said, no, that's not true? And now sometime later, I'm like, it is true. Why? Because God was still working. God did not leave me there. The other part of that, though, when you do acknowledge and you say, and you catch on to something, you say, yeah, that is true. Then what you're doing is you're pointing your feet in that direction and you're opening your heart to it. So there can be an acceleration, I think, when we see it. But remember, it's always God working in us. I can't see what I can't see, and I can't make myself see something.
And I can't make another person see something.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's why even Jesus would speak his words, and then he'd say, he that has ears to hear, let him hear, because the rest of it, it's between you and the Father, what's going on. And my belief is that God's working in every human in various ways to bring humanity to the light of his love over time, because it's a seed. He said it's going to be like that. It's not going to be a quick fix. You're not going to see, boom, everything crumble and be glorious the next day and all that. He said, my kingdom is in you, and it's a seed, and eventually it grows, becomes like this big tree where everybody can find rest. And that's the kingdom. And so the kingdom is growing within us. And by that, we mean that it's coming into our own understanding, where we understand it. We do have the mind of Christ, but in our own understanding, we're still learning these things. And so That's sort of the marriage work between the spirit and the soul of the person. The spirit of God and the soul of the person is the spirit is the teacher, and in this relationship, we're becoming one in our thoughts and in our ways with that. But yes, I'm glad you asked that, because Jesus was very clear in saying that it's a process, it's a walk, and it's something that we have in the now, but we're learning of it. Revelation is not God bringing something new to us that wasn't there. Revelation is something that's always been here, but it gets uncovered where we can see it.
You said that revelation means unveiling.
Yeah. For instance, we are really complete. If we could see the finished work, my goodness, we are so whole and so glorious.
But we just don't see it. Is that what you're?
Yeah, and because it's unveiled. But what happens in this walk, as the kingdom increases within us, is we see it more and more, and we start to see more and more who we are. We start to see more and more who he really is. And it's like, oh, okay, God, I thought that about you, but I see that's not true. You're better than that.
Yeah.
And so there's unveiling that happens, or revealing that
Something
happens. It's beautiful. I really love it.
Yeah, I heard recently is if you take a caterpillar and you test its DNA, it will come back as a butterfly, even though the caterpillar hasn't become
Like a butterfly
in reality, or in the world, because that's who it already is. And we're like that, complete in Christ, have everything that we need, even though there's still some.
So you're saying, let's say I give a scientist the DNA of a caterpillar and I say, guess what this is? And so he looks at it and he goes, that's a butterfly. And I'm like, ha ha, wrong. It's a worm. And he's like, no, it's a butterfly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that's a really neat thing, because I think the Christian life, a lot of it is this tension between who God says I am and who I see myself as. And there's this kind of like, okay, I know you say, yeah, I don't know, beloved or beautiful, but I just did this thing and I'm clearly not that. And I'm kind of learning how to fully embrace that identity that he's given me.
Yeah.
I see this in the life of Peter. I'm sorry, I know we're talking about Romans and Paul and all, but
no, this is all tied right in with this.
Peter was given the name Rock. He was Simon, then he was given the name Petra, meaning rock, like this sturdy foundation. But after that, he was scared. He ran away. He rebuked Jesus. He did all these unrock-like things, but he was the rock, but he didn't see it yet. He sunk when they were walking on water, when he started looking at the waves. So there was all these things about Peter that seemed to deny who Jesus said he was, but he was that anyway. And he would become that when he spoke on the day of Pentecost and kind of owned who he was. And even after that, he had moments where he got scared of what the Jewish people coming into the church were thinking of him. So he stopped eating.
He hides his ham sandwich.
Yeah. He starts eating kosher in front of him, and Paul has to call him out. But he is that, and he's becoming that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And even, Jesus told Peter when he said, I won't leave you, they might. And he says, Peter, Satan wants to sift you as wheat. He said, but I'm gonna pray. He says, and when you're converted or when you're changed, I want you to strengthen your brothers. In other words, you're going to go through it. You're going to fall flat on your face tonight.
Yeah.
He says, but change is happening to you, and you're going to strengthen your brothers. And that's what 2 Corinthians 3 is talking about. It says, I love this. It says, when the veil is removed, or when revelation happens, as it happens, and revelation is happening here and there. When revelation happens or the veil is removed, it's like looking in a mirror, and we behold God's glory looking in a mirror, and we're transformed into that image. In other words, we're really becoming who we already are in our outward actions and our thoughts, because we are that. The Bible is clear. Now are we the sons of God, 1 John 3. Though it does not yet appear, though you might not look like it, it doesn't change the fact, because in Christ we see our true finished work. We see he's the Alpha and the Omega. We see where we've come from. We from him, where we're going to him, and where we are now in him, with him, just like Jesus. And as we grow in this, revelation happens. It becomes more of a reality where we start to wake up in the morning with more of that awareness. And so it gets better, but it's a walk. It's a growth. It's a seed. It's a producing from within that happens, and it's day by day, and it was never meant to be an instant fix. It was meant for us to attain to the knowledge of the things of life and God as we go and grow, because that is the weaving of his ways into us, where they literally are a part of our being rather than something that just God did to us.
Right, right.
And that gets us down to who we are. It's a beautiful walk in relationship. There are hardships in this world, and it hurts sometimes, and it's sad, but he is with us, and we are very safe with him. And like Jesus said, I know where I've come from, and I know where I'm going, and God is with me now. And so that's God, God, and God. And
the same for us. We know where we came from.
Exactly.
Because he
came from him.
Yeah, and he's good. He's love, and he created
We came
us.
from love.
Yeah.
And we're going to love.
Yeah.
And we're being loved right now.
And
we don't always feel like it.
As we become butterflies.
But we're learning that that we are loved.
Yeah.
And that's where our joy and peace comes from.
One of the things I love about chapter 5, I love this comparison that he makes, and that the comparison, the early work of Adam is trumped by the work of Christ. And that if we can grasp this and believe this, this is so much greater than the work of Adam. So it's to look on these things like, wow, this joy is residing in me. This patience is residing in me, as opposed to the way of Adam, which is, man, I'm so impatient. I am so negative. I don't know why. But it's where our revelation, our focus is, that either brings life or brings death. You can really see it very clearly, right?
And we finish in verse 19 where he says, "Oh, that's a perfect segue into this." In verse 19, he says, "For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so also by one man's obedience many are made righteous." There we are.
And
Jesus, it's all in him.
Word many isn't a limiting.
It's the same many that's mentioned than the many that were influenced by Adam.
Okay.
It's the same many.
Okay.
So
if we were all influenced by Adam, then we're all influenced by Jesus.
By Jesus.
Or if only 7 out of 10. I like that you said 7 out of 10 were influenced by Adam, then 7 out of 10 are.
Right. And so and Paul it's so clear. Paul makes that. He says, don't miss out on this. Because everybody, you believe in what Adam did. So it's amazing the faith that people have in Adam to do this to all of us, but not Jesus.
That's a good point. Okay, is this the wrap up of
That's Romans chapter 5? Where we go?
We're going to continue in Romans, I think, in the next episode.
Yeah.
So hold on. We've got some more of this.
Some more great chapters in this book.
Yeah, theological treatise by Paul, like his thesis of grace.
I love the book of Romans. When I used a paper Bible, that was always the first pages that wore out.
Why was it? What was it about it?
Because just like you said, there's so much in Romans that you can go straight to Romans, and there's so much of the gospel message you can just preach from it, because like you said, it's his treatise on his it's his theological work, the grace of God. Others, his letters are great, are beautiful too, but like in Corinthians, he's dealing with problems and issues and things that were particular to that church. So there's some of that. With Romans, it's more generalized. And so it's something that all of us can get, as far as it's so theologically sound and clear, and it's spelled out in the book of Romans. So when we want to preach the gospel, we find so much of the explanation of it in the book of Romans.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We hope this has been an encouragement. As always, feel free to reach out to us with questions or your thoughts. We always love to interact with people over. I think because we love conversations and we love relationships that we enjoy that back and
And we
forth.
love addressing the questions that we have. Growth and thinking is really asking questions of ourselves,
And
even.
how do I apply it in my own
Yeah.
situation or my
And
own
what
life?
does this mean?
Yeah. And we can't always get back to everyone, but we do try
Yeah.
to answer every
Yes.
question or, someone might reach out to us on our website, rickmanis.com, that there's a place where you can contact us and talk to us.
Hey, thank you guys for watching. We appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too. I mean, you too.